All right, anybody not ready? All right, good afternoon. I'm Pinellas County Sheriff Bob Gualtieri, and here with me is Clearwater Police Chief Eric Gandy. And we're here today to announce the arrest of Clearwater Police Detective Frederick Lease. Lease was arrested earlier today on 8 felony public corruption charges because Frederick Lease decided to cross the line from being a law enforcement officer to being a criminal. And in doing so, he dangerously endangered the lives of real law enforcement officers trying to rid our community of deadly drugs. Police corruption, fortunately, happens very rarely in Pinellas County, but when it does, it's going to be met with very harsh consequences. Lease faces felony charges of misuse of public office for the unlawful disclosure of criminal investigative information and unlawful use of two-way communication devices. He was booked into the Pinellas County Jail with a bond of $200,000. As a Clearwater police officer, Lease was assigned to the agency's narcotics unit. He's also the president of the union that represents Clearwater police officers. I'm going to explain what led to Lease's arrest today, and Chief Gandy will speak about Lease's employment history with the Clearwater Police Department and union involvement with the agency. On July 24th of this year, we held a press conference and announced the arrest of 13 individuals on drug trafficking charges. Those individuals included Matthew Turner and Henry Smith, two people on the board next to me underneath the photograph of Lease. The arrests that we announced back in July resulted from a year-long investigation that included an undercover Pinellas County Sheriff's Office detective making drug purchases from the Turner drug trafficking organization. This organization was obtaining significant amounts of drugs from a source of supply in California and distributing the drugs throughout the Tampa Bay area, especially in St. Petersburg. The evidence shows that from August of 2023 through July of 2024, that this Pinellas County-based drug trafficking organization, of which Turner and Smith were two of the primary participants, obtained and distributed about 220 kilograms of cocaine, 660 pounds of methamphetamine, 25 kilograms of fentanyl, 5.5 kilograms of black tar heroin, and 14 kilograms of MDMA. That's about $3.7 million worth of cocaine, $990,000 worth of meth, and about $750,000 worth of fentanyl. And I recap all that is because what you're going to hear about how Lease enabled them to do what they did. Now, because this drug trafficking organization operated throughout the Tampa Bay region, we coordinated with other police agencies during the course of our investigation, including the Clearwater Police Department. At one point, Detective Lease was explicitly told of our investigation regarding Turner and Smith, while our detectives were attempting to learn information from other law enforcement agencies about the Turner drug trafficking organization. We also know that in his position as a narcotics detective, Lease had access to confidential law enforcement databases where he was able to watch for and then search for individuals under investigation by other agencies. Lease placed an alert in that system regarding Turner and Smith so that he would be notified if there was an investigation being conducted into their activities by other narcotics units, including the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. We know that in March of this year, while this investigation was ongoing and active, Lease received an alert based on information that we entered and then further searched the database regarding Smith and Turner. Lease then contacted, once he found out about this information, Lease then contacted a Pinellas County Sheriff's Office narcotics detective to obtain more information about our investigation of Turner and Smith, and then told Turner and Smith that they were under investigation and that they were in trouble. In a text message from Smith to Lease, Smith asked Lease to get more information and stated, I quote, "See what you can find out if you can. You got me worried." Lease, in replying to Smith, said, and I quote, "I hit up one of my boys. I told you it's either someone is talking or you slipped up with an unknown." Now, the person who he's referring to as one of his boys is a Pinellas County Sheriff's Office detective. And what Lease told Smith in his reply was that either someone was providing information about him and Turner to us, or that he had sold drugs to someone that he didn't know who was working with law enforcement. At one point, Lease also told Smith, and I quote, "I got you, bro." And Lease later told Smith that Turner specifically was being investigated for trafficking in a substantial amount of fentanyl. Now, one of the things that they cooked up here and kind of concocted, and you're going to have to follow me with this for a second, is once Turner and Smith realized that we were investigating them, they're in trouble, but obviously their greed took over because you can see the volume of drugs that were involved and the amount of money that was involved in this thing, is they decided to keep doing what they were doing because to them, I guess, the reward outweighed the risk. But they concocted this scheme with their buddy, Detective Lease, that Turner and Smith were going to go out and try and buy drugs. Now, they're selling tons of drugs, but they're going to go out and buy drugs from somebody that they know and set that person up with Lease so that they would be acting as informants, if you will, for Lease. And they could get credit later on for setting this person up ahead of time so that when they got arrested, that they could say they were working off charges with Lease and that they would get what we call substantial assistance or good time off of their sentence. So this is a preemptive strike on their part with Lease, and they all concocted this little scheme to go out and Turner and Smith buy drugs from somebody, do it under the auspices of Lease, and Lease would then go out and arrest these people, and Smith and Turner would get credit for setting them up for getting time off for what they were doing that Lease was helping them out with. So it's a pretty elaborate scheme that they're talking about, and it is, say, reprehensible to say the least, and it just shows where their mindset was and how extensively they were scheming with each other, including Lease. Now, during another text message exchange, Lease told Smith, so this is the detective telling the drug trafficker, "When the time comes, you know I got you all, and I'm handling yours now, but Matt," who's Matthew Turner, "Matt got to wait." Well, what that refers to is what I just told you, because Smith was out trying to set people up so that they could stack all of that to get him credit, and then he's going to work with Turner to do the same thing. Lease also told Smith, quote, "I'm solid, always have been," which he's telling them that he's got their back. Lease also had in-person meetings with Smith and Turner where he disclosed detailed confidential information about our drug trafficking investigation. And this is information that he knew only because of his position as a Clearwater police narcotics detective, including the investigative techniques that we were using during this case. And this investigation involved the use of wiretaps, and Lease told Turner that his phone was being listened to by law enforcement, which caused Turner to switch phones during the course of the investigation and would cause us to have to chase different phones and get additional court orders because he kept switching phones based on the information that he was getting from Detective Lease. Now, this information that Lease disclosed to Turner also caused them, meaning Smith and Turner, to detect surveillance, physical surveillance that was being conducted of them, and this also frustrated our investigation. At one point, during an intercepted phone call between Turner and Smith, Turner asked Smith when the last time was that he had talked with Lease, because Turner said that he has seen surveillance, and he stated, I quote, "I'm taking stuff into the house, and here comes the helicopter." In another call, Smith and Turner discussed the ongoing information they had received from Lease about our investigation and that they should have left town, with Smith telling Turner, and I quote, "Like for someone in his field," meaning Lease, who's a cop, a narcotics detective, "like for someone in his field to say, get on a plane, get the F out of here, you know what I'm saying." Now, one very troubling aspect of Lease's betrayal of his oath, the trust, his job, is that by disclosing to Turner and Smith that they were under active investigation by the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, Lease put the undercover detective at risk when he purchased significant quantities of drugs from this drug trafficking organization on 9 separate occasions during the course of the investigation. Now, one of the questions that always comes up in one of these situations is why? And really, other than simply being a corrupt cop, it appears that Lease was friends with Turner and Smith, and that his friendship with these drug traffickers was more important to him than upholding his oath of office and his loyalty to fellow law enforcement officers. Lease, especially as a union president, is supposed to be looking out for cops, not putting them in harm's way. Lease was supposed to be getting drugs off the streets, not protecting drug traffickers so that they could sell more drugs. And Lease has betrayed everything that a law enforcement officer stands for. And at the end of the day, he's a corrupt cop who needs to go to prison. Now I'm going to turn it over to Chief Gandy, who will talk about Lease's employment with the Clearwater Police Department and his role as a president of the union. But before Chief Gandy speaks, I want to say this, is that Lease is not representative of the members of the Clearwater Police Department. He's not representative of law enforcement in Pinellas County. This is an anomaly. The Clearwater Police Department is a great organization, has a lot of fine people. I've worked with them for decades, and this is a one-off. And this is not anything that the community needs to be concerned about. This is something where it pops up. We don't have this very often, thankfully, in this county. When it does, as I said, we're going to handle it swiftly, and it's going to be met with harsh consequences, as it was today. But people should have confidence in the Clearwater Police Department and in all law enforcement in Pinellas County, because you got a lot of hardworking people out there that are doing the right thing. And this is just simply an anomaly situation. So I'm going to turn it over to Chief Gandy, and then we'll take any questions that you have.
Thanks, Sheriff. So I've contemplated a lot of adjectives to qualify my anger over this situation, but I've got to measure my words carefully because we still have administrative investigations to conduct related to Detective Lease. I'm just going to go over a few things with you. I got a briefing from PCSO that pointed to this potential criminal activity with Lease. He's a 9-year veteran of the Clearwater Police Department. He's served in narcotics since 2022, and for the last 3 years or so, he's been the president of FOP 10, which is the police officers bargaining unit for the City of Clearwater Police Department. So during this initial briefing, we established a line of communication knowing that we each had pieces of this puzzle. We maintained some of the evidence and information at Clearwater. The Sheriff's Office had quite a bit of information related to this case, and we set up a line of communication between our command staff to coordinate those efforts. I immediately initiated an administrative investigation into Detective Lease, put him on limited duty and restricted access to any law enforcement sensitive material, even removing his radios. This is what really gets me. Operational security in undercover operations is critical. I did this for a while, and that was always the thing that concerned us most. Has our investigation, has our detective, has our informant been compromised? Because those compromises can cost someone their life. It leaves me really angry beyond belief, but as the sheriff said, he's the president of the officers union. He represents hundreds of Clearwater officers and their interests. When you look at these criminal cases, it appears he put the interests of drug traffickers over those interests in his own officers. But despite me being really pissed off over this, I'm in a position where I have to follow state statute and have to conduct this administrative investigation carefully and methodically, particularly in cases such as this that result in termination recommendations. For those reasons, he's on administrative leave and has no access to our facilities during the course of these administrative investigations. And upon conclusion, we'll certainly reach out to the media and have a briefing on the outcome of those cases. I think I'll be glad to answer any questions related to that, and the Sheriff certainly will answer any that he can related to the criminal piece.
Anybody got anything?
Sheriff, or this could be for you actually. I mean, how much did he delay this investigation into these drug traffickers?
Well, he impeded it, there's no doubt, because as we were doing these wiretaps and we're having to constantly scramble from phone to phone because especially Turner was dumping phones, and they were very, very concerned about physical surveillance because they knew we were onto them. There were some other things that we had done investigatively that were disclosed to them. And so because of those things, and then they would inquire, and I just gave you a snippet. I mean, there's literally hundreds, if not more, pages of text messages between them, and we've been able to, with search warrants, dump their phones. So we've got all the communications, we got all the text messages, we had intercepted calls between Smith and Turner about Lease. So there was a lot of interference. There was a lot of impeding what we were doing, but we were able to obviously overcome it. But it took a lot of work, and probably could have brought this thing to a conclusion a little earlier if it hadn't been for all the nonsense that was going on and everything that was disclosed. So, it was a big deal.
Sure. When did you become aware of Lease's involvement, and how did you become aware of that?
Well, we became aware of it really the first time was we had some inclination that something was going on because he was dumping these phones, and sometimes these people are just paranoid, sometimes there's another reason. So, we were concerned that there might be something going on there and some reason for it, because a little bit more than what they ordinarily are. But to answer your question directly, we didn't really become aware of it until we saw the text messages, and that was when Smith and Turner were arrested, and we, with a search warrant, started downloading those messages. And then we were starting to put it together between those messages and then some intercepted phone calls. And Lease goes by, and they called him by the name of Will, even though his name is Frederick or Fred, he goes by, but he also goes by Will. And we didn't put that together, so we had these calls with Will. So it was really at the end of the case is when we had an idea that we had a problem.
And is there any evidence at all that he received kickbacks in the form of drugs or money?
No, and the charges would be very different if we had that information. We obviously explored that in depth, but there's just no evidence of that. And that's why I said in my remarks is there's always a question as to why. But the best we can tell is that his loyalty, his allegiance were to these people, and it was more out of a friendship that he had with Smith and Turner than anything else. Of course, it also begs the question, and it's a legit, is that, who else has he done this with, and how many other times has this happened? And it's going to raise a lot of questions for the state attorney on other cases, that Lease has made. Obviously, all of the cases that are in the pipeline are problematic. So this has some pretty far-reaching consequences.
Any evidence that he had contact with Mr. Turner and Mr. Smith before this case? And just kind of get a little more details about this friendship.
He knew him for a long time, and we don't know exactly all the details of that, but this had been a relationship that had been in place for a while. And Turner and Smith have been selling dope for a long time. So, this wasn't the first rodeo with this. It just so happened that we were in a position where we were capturing it. And Smith and Turner, he'd probably been funneling information to Smith and Turner for a really, really long time.
Sure. You mentioned that, as you said, he was protecting drug dealers, and at the same time, he's turning a blind eye to these serious, deadly drugs going out into the community. I mean,
right.
Can you talk a little bit about that? What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think the reaction is an obvious one, is that it's reprehensible, it's horrible, it's every adjective that you can use to describe it. And at the end of the day, I guess what I would say, it's just such a huge, leaves just a knot in your gut, because it's a betrayal. It's a betrayal of trust. It's a betrayal of trust that Chief Gandy and everybody at the Clearwater Police Department had in this guy, and he was in a position of trust with his peers, with his colleagues, with fellow officers. As a president of the union, he's supposed to be looking out for cops, not putting them in harm's way. He's supposed to be doing the right thing by the community. I mean, he signed up to do a job and to protect the community, and he's harming the community. So everything that he was supposed to be doing, he's doing the opposite of. And so I guess the way I would describe it is that it's a kick in the gut to everybody, and it's a betrayal. It's a betrayal of everything that we do and what we stand for.
I had a question for Chief Gandy. Was the department aware of his connection to these men prior to bringing him on, and if not, why not?
I don't believe those connections existed that far back. We believe that they were within the last couple of years, and that's really all I can speak to on that as we conduct the remainder of our investigation.
Sheriff, you mentioned there were 9 different times where undercover officers were potentially put in danger. Could you drill down a little more and give us a broader explanation of that?
Well, so go back to the conversation that was intercepted, if you will, or the text message. I'll be very clear and accurate with that, between them when Lease is telling them is that you got a problem, they are investigating you, and it's either one of a couple things. One is that somebody's dropped a dime on you and somebody is talking to the cops about what you're doing and they're getting information. That's how they've been able to make a case. And Lease at one point told them there were actual charges pending against them. Again, I'm just giving you snippets of what we have. And the other alternative is that you sold to somebody that is an unknown, somebody you didn't know. Well, that's a classic example of where you're putting somebody an undercover, because usually what happens is that these undercovers are introduced through somebody else. Sometimes there's long-term relationships, sometimes there's not, or longer term, but they become suspicious of who they're selling to. And, you know, in this world, and remember also, I didn't mention it, but if you went back to the press conference from July 24th when we announced this, is that we also see several guns from Turner and Smith, from their stash place out there at Roosevelt and 19. So these guys were also charged with armed drug trafficking. And so when an undercover is making buys and somebody is suspicious of them, is that sadly, unfortunately, is that sometimes if they don't know and they get suspicious, they're going to harm them or they're going to kill them because they think that that person is somebody, and a lot of times they don't know that they're cops. And this is one of the most dangerous things that law enforcement officers do, is to act in an undercover capacity. And sometimes it's because they don't know, they're not concerned that they're undercover cops, they're concerned they're informants and they're willing to kill informants. So that's what makes it so dangerous. And so when these guys are all hinked up, they're all suspicious, they're all worried, they got a cop who's telling them that somebody, okay, is into you, and somebody that you're selling to and your organization is selling to might be the cause of your problems, that puts any undercover that is working in that investigation in some really serious peril. That's how it works, and that's why it's a big deal and it's a big problem. Anybody else have any other questions?
I did have one other question. It was also for Chief Gandy. Do you know whether he'll continue in his capacity as union president while the investigation internally is ongoing?
They've already resolved that at the union level. We have nothing to do with the union interactions. It's a completely independent body of the police department. But they've already resolved that and have a interim or temporary president in place.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.